Welcome to the American Girl Yearbook, Class of 1986. So this is going to be an ongoing video series that is going to chronicle each year of American Girl and the American Girls collection and look at every single item that was released in that year. So when Pleasant T. Rowland founded the American Girls collection as part of Pleasant Company in 1986, her idea was that this would be an heirloom quality doll that would be enjoyed by a child and then passed down when they were an adult to someone else. This was something to be enjoyed and to be savored. It was meant to be a girl and their doll or a child and their doll, not necessarily every single doll and every single part of a collection. I'm sure there were kids who were part of that very special tax bracket that could have the entire collection of every single doll. That was not what was planned to be the expected process of a child obtaining a doll. It's supposed to be a child and their special doll that is going to be their best friend and their playmate. Ordering from the American Girls catalog was its own experience. You would flip through the catalog and find the things that you wanted, and then you or a parent or a guardian would fill out the order form or call the toll-free number and place an order. You would wait for that order to be processed so then it could be put in the mail, and sooner or later you would receive that very, very special package from Pleasant Company of your American Girls collection items. When it came to ordering from a catalog, that whole process might take weeks or maybe even a month for you to finally end up with the products that you picked out in hand. But it was worth waiting for. Nowadays, we order things online and then complain if they take longer than 2 days to arrive. And what does that say about our long-term enjoyment of the thing if we're upset by the process of waiting even a day or two for it to arrive? Are we going to become that disinterested in that product just as quickly? Or are we going to savor it and enjoy it? It is now the 40th anniversary of the American Girls collection. Pleasant Company launched the original catalogs in the fall of 1986, and it's now the late summer of 2026. We're looking at 40 years of American Girl. I've been very fascinated by the history of this company as it's changed hands, as CEOs at Mattel have turned over, leadership and design teams have changed at American Girl. It's been very interesting to see how this company has persisted. And so I want to do something that actually allowed us to look at the company more holistically and see how it's changed over those 40 years, what the conversation between American Girl and pop culture are, what the conversation between American Girl and the modern economy happen to be. I'm so fascinated by how pop culture, economic factors, politics, etc. shape a company like American Girl. So to do that, I've started a new project. Welcome to the American Girl Yearbook. So welcome to the American Girls collection, Class of 1986. We're going to be going through the catalog, and I'll be using some scans as well as my own Pleasant Company catalogs to go over the products year by year. We'll take a look at everything, discuss the products that were available, discuss new releases, and then let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. And we're going to start with the message to parents that was present on the back of the early Pleasant Company catalogs, and that was present on the 1986 catalog. It is a letter from Pleasant Rowland to parents. It says, "Deep in the basement of a small museum lies a tattered, water-stained doll trunk. Open the dusty lid, and the long-ago childhood of some lucky young girl comes instantly to life. Tucked gently inside is a beautiful porcelain doll, dearly loved and much played with. Dressed in blue silk and surrounded by marvelous accessories, this doll and her tiny treasures were the most cherished possessions of their young owner, possessions so special that they were put away until some faraway day when her own little girl could delight in them. I discovered this trunk by chance more than a year after I had begun working on the American Girls collection. It served as a powerful reminder of why I had begun the collection and what I hoped it would accomplish. At an age when girls are old enough to read and still love to play, they need books and dolls that capture their imaginations and are worth caring for. The stories in the American Girls collection come alive with beautiful dolls and period doll clothes. The doll accessories are replicas of real things found in times gone by. They are quality pieces, not plastic playthings, and are made for children over 8 years old to treasure. I hope the American Girls collection will be dearly loved and well played with, and then passed down to other generations of girls tomorrow. A reminder that growing up in America is, has been, and always can be an experience to treasure. Pleasant T. Rowland. Pleasant lays it out very clearly in the letter to parents exactly what her vision for the company is. That again, this is an heirloom piece that is meant to be cherished, played with, and then passed on. That speaks to the quality that she envisioned for these dolls, but also the staying power and cultural relevance of something as simple as a doll. Something with just 5 points of articulation, no gimmicks, no batteries, no screens, just a doll. And before we dive into the catalog, we have to talk a little bit about the rife, fertile ground that was the 1980s. In the 1980s, the US was experiencing the baby boomlet. So baby boomers of the 1950s were now having children, and the toy industry was reaping the benefits. This influx of prospective new customers in the toy industry was astonishing, and it wasn't just new customers at approximately 4 million, but additionally, toy executives were betting on the rising divorce rate among Americans. Toy executives noted that the children of divorced parents tend to receive more gifts, whether that was because they had step-parents or mom's new boyfriend, or it was, a way of extending a gesture of love to a child from a now broken home. It didn't matter to the executive. They were just happy to bank on it. And an extremely important backdrop to this toy boom was President Reagan's deregulation of advertising to children. Prior to Reagan's presidency, there were heavy regulations on how and when children could be advertised to. But with the deregulations brought in by Reagan in 1981, children could now be advertised to directly and with very, very little limitations through their own programming. This massive deregulation by Reagan surrounding children's media, along with what is known as the Star Wars effect of 1978, where the toy industry, namely Mattel, vastly underestimated the American public's appetite for Star Wars toys, is what led to the children's animation and toy boom of the 1980s, which then propelled the toy industry forward. Also, Reagan's America was a great place if you were a millionaire, as Pleasant Rowland was. Reagan rolled back taxes on the 1%. He cut capital gains tax, and all of this would make very fertile ground for a millionaire such as Pleasant Rowland to go ahead and start her own toy company. However, since Pleasant had $1.2 million from her textbook royalties to invest into Pleasant Company at its founding, that likely all went towards production, and there likely would have been very little money left over for advertising, especially in that new, very coveted time slot in children's programming, which was now being sought after by large toy companies and other large corporations advertising directly to children. So advertising to children through mail order catalogs, which also would have been affected by the same deregulations through the FTC and Reagan in the 1980s, was the next best call. The 1980s saw a major swing towards traditional conservatism, and much of that can also be seen in the dress and whatnot of the American Girls collection, a company that is definitely a reflection of the triangulated culture wars of the 1980s between traditional leftists, traditional conservatives, and the new liberals of the 1980s. This is not saying that the American Girls collection itself was conservative. However, it did reflect many conservative values. The company, however, has always centered girls and been very progressive in doing so. Reagan's consecutive terms in office left him and his wife as quite powerful cultural figures during the 1980s, and Nancy Reagan led the war on drugs through her Just Say No campaign. And the special brand of 1980s conservatism leaned heavily on fear-mongering and what are you going to do about the kids type messaging. So with the rise in fear-mongering for parents and also the rise of the yuppie, it was the perfect yuppie parent status symbol, and also was one of those purchases that promised a parent that yes, in fact, you are doing right by your child, you are doing your best by your child, it's going to be okay. There was a very strong trend in the 1980s of positive messaging to contemporary audiences through nostalgic media. Think the rampant reruns of I Love Lucy and Gilligan's Island, followed by the brand new Happy Days, and then the advent of Pleasant Company. All of these old-fashioned storytelling mechanisms to reassure a modern audience that ultimately we made it through before, everything's going to be okay. So let's go through the catalog. So in 1986, the first 3 dolls were released. Each one had their own time period and historical relevance. The original Pleasant Company catalogs went in chronological order, so they started with Kirsten, whose story began in 1854. One of the really special things about the early catalogs is that when you open the catalog, the full page layout of the doll photo was actually life-sized. So these catalogs were on the larger size so that when you had that centerfold laid out, you could actually get an idea for what it would be to have an 18-inch doll in front of you. Just a very cool idea. So we start with Kirsten from 1854. All of the dolls are dressed in red, white, and blue. The different levels of saturation and value change amongst their color palettes, but their meat outfits are all some iteration of red, white, and blue. In 1986, you could order your Kirsten doll with either a paperback copy of her book or a hardback copy of her meat book. Additionally, you get her accessories, which included her bonnet, her amber heart necklace, and her spoon bag and spoon. Also available in 1986 were all the items from Kirsten's school collection, the book for which was Kirsten Learns a Lesson. So you could get the book Kirsten Learns a Lesson, you could get her school dress and shawl, her Pioneer school lunch, and her slate bag and supplies. In 1986, you could also get all the items from Kirsten's Christmas story, Kirsten's Surprise. I remember very vividly my dad explaining to me when I got my first catalog how in some European countries it was tradition to light candles actually on the tree itself, and that it was a Swedish tradition that Kirsten had a wreath of candles on her head. I was not to do that. So you could get the book, Kirsten's Surprise, her St. Lucia gown, her St. Lucia wreath, which was the one I was not to try and make myself, her St. Lucia tray, and Kirsten's doll, Sari. The original saris were actually made by local artisans in Wisconsin, and there's a lot of variation amongst the different early sari dolls that you'll find because they were handmade. Also in 1986, you could get Kirsten's Sweet Dreams collection, which was her bedtime collection. You could get Kirsten's trunk, her bed, Kirsten's nightgown, and the girl-sized nightgown. So the original introduction of the Dress Like Your Doll line that we know today. And that was Kirsten's complete collection as of 1986. You could purchase her complete collection for $450 and you would get a free $5 hairbrush from Pleasant Company. Doesn't really offset the cost, but hey, free is free. Now, if you notice at the very top of Kirsten's collection checklist, it says Collector Edition of Kirsten Doll. Let's talk about that. So in 1986, you could order a collector edition doll of Kirsten, Sam, or Molly, and each of these dolls was hand-signed by Pleasant Rowland and dated and numbered. They came with a certificate of authenticity as well as their hardback book. The dolls were only $95 each, and nowadays they go for thousands. And only the first 2,500 Sam, Molly, and Kirsten dolls were signed and dated and available like this through Pleasant Company. One other little bit of 1986 trivia. Here is the back of a pamphlet. You'll notice that it says for ages 6 and older. Just wanted to share that with you. That was changed later on. You can actually find pamphlets that have been modified by hand where the 6 has been turned into an 8. All right, and next in the 1986 catalog would be Samantha. So Samantha Parkington's story takes place in 1904 New York. In 1986, you could get the doll Samantha by herself with either a paperback version of her meat book or a hardback copy of her meat book, and then you could purchase her accessories separately. At this time in 1986, the very first edition of the accessories were only $20, but that does equate to in today's money, so taking inflation into account. I remember seeing Samantha for the first time when I was little in the catalog, and thinking that essentially she was just a little too fancy. Like, she looked like she was dressed the way that I did not want to be dressed for church on Sundays. And before we get started on Miss Parkington, here's the listing that appeared at the front of the catalog for the collector edition version of her doll, which again would have been signed, dated, and numbered by Pleasant Rowland. In 1986, you could get all of the items from Samantha's school story, which included the book Samantha Learns a Lesson, Samantha's Buster Brown dress. You could get Samantha's tea tin lunchbox, and her book strap and supplies. Also available at this time were all of the pieces from Samantha's Christmas story, Samantha's Surprise. You could get the book, again, in either paperback or hardback edition. You could get her cranberry party dress, her real gingerbread house. This was actual gingerbread that came with actual little candies and everything, so that you could construct a doll-sized gingerbread house for your doll. Her Christmas music box, which was a Silvestri item, and Samantha's doll. And of course, in 1986, you could get Samantha's steamer trunk. You could also get all of the initial items from her Sweet Dreams collection. At the time, that included her bed and her nightgown. And of course, there was also a girl-sized nightgown. And here's Samantha's collection checklist. And you could purchase her entire collection for $475 in 1986. Of course, free hairbrush included. And lastly is our girl, Molly MicIntire, who's representing 1944. So I remember when I saw Molly in the catalog for the first time, I knew that she looked like me, but I felt like she looked very boyish, which meant she also looked like my brother, and so that was less appealing to me. So in 1986, you could get Molly by herself with her meat book, either a paperback edition or a hardback edition, just like the other girls. And then you could buy her accessories separately, which included her beret and her bag for $20. Oh, sorry, of course, it also came with her coin and her necklace. I love her necklace because it looks like the one that my dad got me in high school, and I wore it every single day. And here's, of course, a close-up of the collector edition Molly listing at the beginning of her portion of the catalog. Again, she could be yours in 1986 for $95. In 1986, you get all the items from Molly's school collection. So that included her book, Molly Learns a Lesson, in either hardback or paperback. You get Molly's plaid jumper and blouse, her brown bag lunch, and her school bag and supplies. You could also get all the items from her Christmas story, which included her book, Molly's Surprise, in either hardback or paperback, her evergreen velvet dress, which is so incredibly 80s. I had dresses so much like this when I was a teeny tiny person. Molly's stocking in all of its little pieces, and Molly's Christmas box. And the contents of the Christmas box actually changed depending upon the time of year. It originally had a snow globe in it, but if that snow globe was mailed and in transit during the dead of winter, it would freeze and then explode. Water inside of the snow globe would freeze, and as we should all know, frozen water expands, so then that expansion would break the glass. So in the dead of winter, they would instead send a pack of playing cards. Also in 1986, you could get Molly's trunk. You could also get Molly's bed and her pajamas. And of course, there were girl-sized pajamas available as well. I do love her pajamas. And finally, here is the checklist for Molly's collection, which could be yours in entirety for $425 in 1986. I find it really interesting how there was so much variation across all of the collections as far as pricing went. Now, under Pleasant Company American Girl, the collections were very much dictated by the stories that were available. So you'll note that only 3 books were available for each character in 1986, and only the collections representing the 3 available books for each character were available in the catalog. There was also a keepsake edition of the American Girls collection books that actually featured all 9 of them, which is really crazy. I think that's just such a neat thing to have, because we don't usually see any sort of cross-pollination between the different characters' collections, but we did get to see that with this box set, which is very cool. And you could get that keepsake edition with either paperbacks or hardback books. And the slipcase that actually housed all 9 books, it had a ribbon on the top that held in a gold-plated bookmark. It was a Pleasant Company bookmark. Very adorable. And in the catalog from 1986, there's actually an area where Pleasant Company thanks a number of institutions who helped develop the original 3 dolls. And that includes the University of Wisconsin Instructional Materials Center, State Historical Society of Wisconsin, American History Workshop, Fashion Institute of Technology, American Swedish Institute, Lillian Schissel of Brooklyn College, and Karen Brown Larimore of the University of Wisconsin. And they also had pictured in the catalog cassette tapes, like audio cassettes, of the 3 books for each girl. In 1986, audio cassettes were available for each of the 9 storybooks that were available through the Pleasant Company catalog, and those were $8.95. They were listed right underneath the hardback and paperback book options. Also available in 1986, you get a pack of metal hangers for $10. You could get a set of book plates for the inside of your book for $7.50. This is where you would go ahead and write down your name and everything. You know, this book belongs to, that was your book plate. In 1986, you could also get the Pleasant Company hairbrush for your dolls that had the proper metal teeth on it. It wouldn't snag or pull the doll's hair like a plastic brush would. And those brushes were only $5. Also, for an extra $2, you could have your items gift wrapped. So everything came in those really beautiful maroon boxes, but for an extra $2, you could have them gift wrap the items for you, and then they would also handwrite a card with whatever message you included. You could also purchase an embossed gift card. I mean, that was just how their gift cards came, but they were embossed, which is very fancy and very of the 80s. And in 1986, they were also advertising in the catalog that there was going to be an American Girl newsletter featuring Samantha, Kirsten, and Molly coming out in January of 1987. So the charge for the newsletter was not advertised, but it was stated in the 86 catalog that an order form would be sent out to any girls for whom there had been a request sent. Despite the fact that I wasn't old enough to read in 1986 when this catalog came out, I love that reading through it with you guys was so nostalgic for me because the catalog remained very much the same throughout the 80s and 90s, as we'll see as we continue through these episodes. But it's just so heartwarming to read about these characters and look at these old photographs. So I really am looking forward to hearing what you guys think of this. All right, guys, my camera's about to die, so I'm going to get going. But yeah, let me know all your thoughts down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.